All right, there we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Monica McCoubry. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. And this is our first episode in our Science of series, our winter series. Today, we're going to be talking about bobcats. Which is a really fun and interesting topic because a lot of people, whether you're from Nebraska or not, a lot of people I found in the public don't know that we have bobcats or see them as which they are, a very elusive species. But the fact is that I think you'll be surprised by the end of the show that you'll learn that we actually have more bobcats in Nebraska than we ever thought, or in decades past where we have had them, we have way more than we ever thought. So let's go ahead and dive into our science of bobcats today. So just also letting everyone know this is being recorded. None of your faces will be in it. It will just be the information and then also my face as well. But none of you will be recorded. I just wanted to make that clear for everyone. I also want you to ask questions. I want you to have comments. Just make sure that if you do put something in the chat, that you are being kind to everyone and that you stay kind of on topic and are relevant to what we're talking about today. Otherwise, we do have that right to remove you. I've never had an issue, but I just want to let everyone know. And then also, I just want to let everyone know that I am by no means a bobcat expert. So I am a science communicator and I'm an expert at science communicating. Our researchers and our biologists here are the experts in the research and the science. But I do love science and I do a lot of research for these programs. So their odds are you're going to have probably a question sometime that I'm not going to be able to answer. I will go find the answer and then I will get back to you. So another reason why we do like to send those registration emails and also those evaluation emails afterwards is because sometimes we do have questions come up and it's a great way to answer those questions for everyone. So if we do have a question I can't answer, you'll probably see it in the email. So I do love science. This is the fourth year that we've been doing these science ofs. I'm not sure if we will continue in 2025 as a live program. We'll have to see here. Haven't decided yet. So I appreciate all of you coming on today. All right, so let's go ahead and talk bobcats. So hopefully everyone at this point has stared at the picture of a bobcat and kind of understands what they look like, hence the name bobcat. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit first about their evolutionary history and how they kind of came to be and where they're from. So bobcats, they're one of the four felines. So we use those terms as a cat. So you have canid, which is a dog, and felid, which is a cat. So they're one of the four extant or still alive cat species in the genus, in the lynx genus. So some of you may have heard of the lynx. There's a few different species of lynx. They're very similar, and we'll talk about the differences here in a little bit, but they are believed to have overall in time evolved from the Eurasian lynx. So this Eurasian lynx entered the US by means of the Bering Land Bridge, which many of you may have heard about 2.5 million years ago. So the first lynx to arrive in what is now the US, it inhabited the South, and they were basically physically separated from the ones that were in the US in the North due to the glacier. So about 20,000 years ago, this population in the South evolved into this, what is now known as the modern day bobcat. And then there was a second population from Asia that occupied the North. And then it evolved to what's now the Canadian lynx. So they were those two separate and distinct populations, and they over time evolved into something else. The oldest fossil of a bobcat that I could find dated back to 1.8 to 3.2 million years old. So they've been around a while. Obviously, like I mentioned, they are cats, so they do have some ties to those other house cats. They have some ties to the pumas, the cougars, all those different types as well. So when we break it down, what are they? So talking about taxonomy here, basically there was a person, Johnson, in this paper that reported that the genus lynx shared a clade, so some characteristics, with the puma or mountain lion, sometimes people call them, the leopard cat, and also the domesticated cat that you may have in your house. Those lineages date back to about 7.15 million years. There was also another paper I found from Kitchener that talked about, he recognizes them in 2017, so this is fairly recent, as being two subspecies of bobcats based on the genetic evidence that he has found. Before then, however, there was about 12. People thought there's 12 or more subspecies of bobcat simply based on their morphology, so what they kind of look like and where they're found in the US. Kitchener also thinks possibly that with those two subspecies, there could also be one more in Mexico, making it 3, but there hasn't been some physical hard evidence of that. It's just a theory, but for sure he recognizes 2 subspecies of bobcats. All right, so their cultural history, bobcats, like many other cats and kind of larger predator animals, they have quite the history in the US, and we're going to talk about that. So bobcats were basically exploited for their pelts way back in the settlement and when North America was being settled. If any of you have heard of the North American model of conservation, this was before then. So basically it was a kind of a free-for-all. And then people realized that the harvesting and the over harvesting, the harvesting of doing it at separate times, it wasn't the best idea. And so basically people kind of realized that if we keep going the way we are, we're not going to have anything. So they instilled this North American model of conservation, basically saying there should be harvest limits, and there's like 7 different principles. You can go ahead and look that up. But basically this was way then before those limits were placed. So in the early 1700s, they're cats, they have teeth, they have claws. There were a lot of bounties offered due to bobcat predation on livestock and poultry. So if you think about it, all these new people are coming into this area, bringing these weird livestock that, no offense, are pretty dumb. And this bobcat is trying to eat. It's an easy meal. So of course there was some interactions and there was some coexisting between those 2 species and those many species. Later on, this is way later, 1950s and 1960s, this is when those detailed scientific studies began. So this wasn't that long ago that scientists are starting to figure out we need to look into these animals. So in 1958, there was a very first tagging study was done. And then in 1966, the first radiotelemetry study was done. Radiotelemetry is basically when you have a collar on an animal or some type of tag, and you take those like metal sticks out there and kind of listen for the beeping noise, and then that's how you find them. So that's what we mean by when we say radiotelemetry. And then the 1960s and 1970s, those bounty programs were completely eliminated. So they got enough research and they got enough data basically saying that we should not do these bounties anymore. In the 70s and 80s, there was this huge rapid increase for their pelts. So after this trade had happened, other spotted cats started to decline. So spotted cat pelts are very sought after. And then there was a large increase in that scientific research again in the 70s and 80s. So even now, when the market is up, bobcat pelts are highly sought after and highly coveted, sometimes reaching hundreds of dollars just by those one pelt. So they're still being used as a fur bearer. Even here in Nebraska, they are considered a fur bearing species. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but just giving you a little bit of the cultural history of those bobcats. So this was a photo from the Mountain Lion Foundation. That's why the mountain lions in the yellow. I tried to get it off, but it looked funny. So you can just kind of see, if you look up here, this lynx lineage right here, lynxes, bobcats, this is kind of where they fit in this felidae species. So not too far removed from the cheetahs and the pumas, a little bit more farther removed from those clouded leopards, but overall they're in that same felidae family. All right. So let's get into what their physical description looks like. I know you can kind of see that from the photo, but let's dive in a little bit more. So bobcats, their scientific name is Lynx rufus, sometimes referred to as the bay lynx or the wild cat, which is not a real species, but a lot of times you see like small town football, high school basketball places are the Wildcats. Even here in Nebraska, we have Wayne State, which are the Wildcats. So it's often used as kind of a slang term for bobcats, but the correct name is bobcat. Vary in size along their continental range. It just kind of depends on where you find them. Some are larger, some are smaller than others, but they are a North American cat in the family Felidae, as we saw earlier. Larger animals tend to be in the north, and the smaller bobcats tend to be in the south. That's just usually how it goes. As far as the vegetation, their habitat preferences, how many prey animals are around their specific range. So it just kind of depends, but that's what the studies show, is that the larger ones are in the north and the smaller ones are in the south. Generally, they're about 1.5 to 2 feet tall at the shoulder. They weigh about twice the size of a normal domesticated house cat, which could be anywhere from about 9 to 33 pounds. They're active at all hours of the night. However, consistently, they are known as being crepuscular. So this just simply means that they are most active during the dawn and the dusk. Lots of different animals are as well. Deer are another great example that they are considered crepuscular, being active during that dawn and the dusk time of the day. All right, so looking at a bobcat, they're obviously brown. They have some different markings on them. There's white on the face. They have those ear tufts, but most of the time they're going to be called a buff to brown color. Sometimes in some areas they have a reddish hinge to them, but they are marked with stripes and spots of brown and black. The fur on the underside is a lot lighter in color. And then they have these what are called facial ruffs. It kind of gives them like a little like mustachy, it looks like their face is kind of fat in my opinion, but it's just their whiskers and it's just their tufts in their face. But they also have the ear tufts. If you look at this picture, kind of hard to see, they're very small, but when you look at the lynx photo, they're also a lot bigger. That's one of the size differences and characteristic differences that you can tell between a lynx and a bobcat. And then also they have the tips of their ears. When you look at them from behind, you'll notice they have some white on them with a little black dot, which I'll show you here in a little bit. And then the quintessential thing about a bobcat is their tail, their bobbed or kind of smaller tail, because back during the bobbed haircut stage, they kind of look like they had a bob going on. So that's where they get their name bobcat. And then also, like we talked about, kittens, one of the cool things about them is the reason that a lot of times scientists believe they have these colorations and these patterns is because of the kittens. Oftentimes being crepuscular, coming out at dawn and dusk, or sometimes nocturnal, coming out at night. Kittens sometimes have a hard time following. If you have younger kids, you know that it's like, come on, let's go, follow me. And all of a sudden you turn around, they're not there. So female kittens usually follow in dim light. So in order for them to see their mom better, if they fall too far behind, the kittens are supposed to look for that white patch under the tail. And then if they're really far back, they can kind of see the whites under on top of their ears on the back. So that's why scientists believe they have those colorations on the back. One of the reasons they believe they have those. All right, so when we talk about a skull, bobcats, it's about 5 inches long, 4.5 inches wide. It's relatively lightweight because they are such agile climbers. They're jumpers, they're pouncers, they're cats. They have to move quite a bit. So they have a very lightweight skull. Most obvious difference when you look at a house cat skull versus a bobcat skull, besides the size, normally they look exactly the same. There are a few characteristics. One of those is the teeth. So there's a tiny premolar behind the upper canines. House cats have this, bobcats lack this. So if you ever get a chance to look at a bobcat skull versus a house cat skull, one of the things that you'll notice is the bobcat is very large. And then they also lack that little premolar that's up on behind their canines. But they have a really large temporalis muscle, which is help with their jaw closing and opening. This is very important because they do have a powerful bite to deliver to their prey. They also have a very kind of poorly developed sagittal crest, very different than a canine. If any of you have a dog at home, if you ever feel on top of their head, you'll notice it feels like a bump. That's their sagittal crest. That is more for their chewing power. It's basically all these muscles need somewhere to hold on to and need a larger surface area. So that is a lot of the time why they have that smart bump. Bobcats and other types of cats usually don't have that. Mountain lions are a little different, but bobcats do not. They have large, sharp canine teeth. They have large incisors to chew their food. And I don't know if anyone can see this, but I did bring a bobcat skull with me today. I do have a better picture here. There you go. So here's what you're looking at. If you notice their skull, it is very blunt in the face. A dog skull is going to have a longer rostrum just because of their amazing sense of smell. But they also don't have a ton of teeth. They have sharp teeth, but not very many. So we can tell from the skull that they are true carnivore, so eating meat. Just to give you a little ID here. So this is a bobcat and here's a mountain lion. So there's a very, very large difference when we look at that. But overall, the structure of the skulls are going to be very similar. All right, so here's our bobcat skull. One of the things I also want to talk about, because I still have a really hard time trying to tell the difference just in a photo sometimes between a bobcat or a lynx. I know in my head what characteristics to look at, but oftentimes I still have a really hard time telling those differences. So bobcats are often confused very readily with lynx species. A lot of people in Nebraska, even when they see a large bobcat, they believe it's a lynx. We don't have lynx in Nebraska. I don't even know if there's any historical record of one coming down here, but we don't have them. It's just simply not cold enough for them. They're more of a northern species. So there are 3 different species of lynx. There's the Canadian lynx, the Eurasian lynx, and then the Iberian lynx. So each lynx has characteristic facial ruffs, ear tufts, and a shorter tail than other cats. Bobcats are slightly smaller than the lynx, and they live also in warmer climates at lower latitudes. Bobcats, the other lynx species, they really like those cold kind of northern latitude areas where the snow is really deep much of the year, and temps sometimes get below about -70 degrees. Bobcats just would not do well. They don't have the right adaptations to live in those areas. And then also they have shorter tails and longer legs. Lynx have longer legs for traveling through that deep snow. Bobcat would be at a disadvantage. They can go through the snow in Nebraska, but they would not be able to survive in those longer or more northern ranges simply because the snow is too deep, it's too cold. They also don't have foot pads. They're bare, whereas a lynx has fuzzy covered foot pads to go through the snow and to keep warm. Lynx also have those longer ear tufts that we talked about. So it looks like a little string is hanging off the very top of these bobcat ears. Lynx usually have longer ones. Scientists believe that it's because it helps them hear and it's thought to improve their hearing. I'm not sure how that helps, but that's what I keep reading it is improves their hearing. All right, so here's a quick video. There is no sound on your end, so don't feel like your computer's broken. Here's a bobcat, so really look at the size of it. If you notice, this one has some pretty good ear tufts on it, but it is smaller. It's not as hefty. This is a bobcat. Here's a lynx, very different already in the size. If you look at the feet, they're huge. They're a little bit more, they look chunky, but they have just thicker, denser fur. Their ear tufts are a lot longer. And I feel like in the face, it's more like of an intense face, and a bobcat feels a little bit more like a cuddly face. I don't know. That's not scientific at all, but here's a lynx. I couldn't find a good one of them moving, but it does really good job at showing those characteristics different than the bobcat. So again, different, larger paws, just bigger body in general, longer ear tufts. All right. So those are the 2 differences. Here's a good picture of them up close, so you can see them side by side. Right away, you notice the lynx is bigger. Their feet are larger. They have more padding on them. Their face is a little bit more elongated, whereas the bobcat's a little bit more round. So difference in size. Also, it seems really easy right now to look at them and see the differences. And in Nebraska, if you see one, you know it's a bobcat. But in areas that could have both, they are a little bit different. I can see how people would be confused on those. All right. So the kittens. So kittens are quite a bit different. If you took our Science of Mountain Lion webinar, you also know that they are different as kittens versus adults. So a lot of people, a lot of rehab centers, especially the time that bobcats are being born, they find kittens and they believe they find a bobcat kitten. Oftentimes you are not finding a bobcat kitten, you are finding a domestic cat. So there are a few good identifiers for this. So as a domestic cat, as a bobcat kitten, best identifier is the true bobcat tail. When you look at a kitten, their tail is usually tapered. It is kind of short and stubby just because they're small, but a bobcat is going to have always that consistent kind of bobbed tail. It will have a black tip on the outward facing side, but it will be solid white on the underside. Oftentimes, kittens don't look like that. Also, something that you should notice is that the bobcats are usually much larger for their age than normal house cat kittens, and they always have spots. If you ever have a kitten, it's pretty rare to have a kitten with spots. Stripes are common, solid colors are common, but most of the time they don't have spots on them. Also, they don't have those tufted ears. So bobcats are always going to have those little tufts on their ears. Kittens, domesticated house cats are not going to have that. So the odds of you finding a bobcat kitten absolutely are not totally unrealistic, but there's probability and possibility. All right. So what about track identification? So when you're out in the wild and you're hiking, how do you know you find a bobcat track? So tracks are always kind of difficult, but there's a couple good identifying characteristics when you look at a cat versus a dog. First off, when you see a dog track, you're going to know it's a dog because most of the time you're going to see the claws. Coyotes, foxes, most of the time you're finding domesticated dog tracks on the trail. They usually have those claws showing. For cats, they're never going to have those claws showing because they are retractable. So they rarely show, I shouldn't say never, but they rarely show because they are retractable. But when you find one, this one's a snow, for instance, but there's 4 toes in the front pad, and then there's 4 toes on the hind pad. And then it's really hard to see in this picture, but I'll show you another one. They have what's called an M-shaped heel pad. So this is the bottom of their track. So kind of where their pads would be. It's in 2 lobes, so it looks like an M, and the front, and then there's 3 in the back. The track size is normally around 2 inches in diameter, but it can range depending on where you are from 1.5 inches to 2.5 inches. Their walking pattern is diagonal and they register directly. So I'll show you what that means. And then when they're hunting, they walk in what's called a zigzag pattern. So here's a couple just different types of tracks so you can see what they look like. So if you notice, oftentimes when they walk in a pretty direct line. And there's also those 4 different pads on the front. And then when you look at the lobe in the back, it looks like an M shape. So that's a really good way to tell if it's a bobcat. How would you tell if it's a bobcat versus a mountain lion? It is basically the exact same track, but a mountain lion is going to be about double the size, so about 4 inches in diameter, whereas a bobcat is about 2. So looks pretty much the same. So if you see a large one that looks like a cat, odds are it's probably a mountain lion, but also think about where you are. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit now about bobcat, just kind of the distribution and behavior. And I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this earlier. If you do have questions, I see the chat popping up. I'm so glad you're asking questions and having comments. We will get to them at the end. I just found that it's a lot easier if we kind of wait till they're all done towards the end rather than trying to answer them during. So I promise I'll get to them. We'll just do it at the end. All right, so where are bobcats? So they are one of the most widely distributed and abundant felid or cat in North America. We don't have very many, so odds are bobcats are going to be pretty good distribution across the country. Their range spans all the way from North America to the south of Canada and even to the south of Mexico. Sorry. All right. They're found in every state except Delaware. I don't know why, but every state except for Delaware must not have the right habitat for them. But they do have higher population densities in the southeast rather than in the western states. That makes more sense because the western states are a little bit more arid. They don't have as many tree covers. Technically, bobcats really prefer the dense wood kind of cover. But again, we have seen them in the desert before. I don't know if any of you have ever seen the photos of the saguaro cactuses where there's a bobcat living in them. We know they're out there, but again, just the higher densities are going to be in the southeast rather than in the western states. And then there are scientists that believe they are thought to no longer exist in parts of the Midwest. Don't worry, it's not Nebraska. And then the Northeast, such as like South Minnesota, Eastern South Dakota, and parts of Missouri, basically due to agricultural related habitat fragmentation. So basically their habitat is being taken over or it's being fragmented too much where they can't have a large home range size because they are converting it to agricultural land. But they are an adaptable species, and scientists have found that their range is not necessarily limited by human presence, except in areas that are intensely cultivated tracts. So they can adapt. If a new agricultural field comes up, they can adapt. But if everything is going, even they are not able to do that. So, and then we've seen that with a lot of species too, whether that's a insect, a bird, a mammal, reptile, anything like that. If it's a monoculture, there's just not enough diversity. So even bobcats have those issues too. So what does their habitat look like? They prefer forests or kind of semi-deserts. They like those mountainous regions, and they also like brushlands, but they're pretty adaptable for anything. They prefer areas with a really dense understory vegetation and obviously high prey density and those woodland habitats. However, they are fairly adaptable, which we've talked about. There have been a few populations that have been found to living in the kind of swampy areas of Florida. So even those swampy areas, they have been doing just fine. They tend to make dens in sheltered areas such as hollow trees, thickets, rocky crevices. They also prefer sheltered areas as they stalk while hunting, and they also like that area to be covered as well. We talked about, they do like areas with dense forests. One of their main prey items is rabbits. So anywhere really where there's a bunch of rabbits and rodents, you probably could find a bobcat. All right, what does their home range look like? So these guys are very territorial. If any of you have a cat at home, they probably have marked your house. They've marked you in some way or another. My favorite thing is when people are always like, cats, they love me. And they're like rubbing up against you with their mouth. They have little scent glands in there. They're marking you. You are theirs. You are not just, well, maybe the cat loves you, yes, but they're also marking you. So just like their large relatives, bobcats are also territorial. They use feces, they use urine, anal gland secretions to basically map out their home range to let other animals know where their home range is and what's in that range. This could be several square kilometers in size. And oftentimes areas are going to overlap. There just are too many bobcats for the small amount of space in the US that they can live. Their territories and their ranges are going to overlap. So for a successful male to have his home range, he wants it to overlap with several females, but he could also overlap with the territory of another male. That is why they have those markings. So they scent mark, they poop mark or feces mark. This is where you need to stop. Oftentimes that doesn't happen. We know that. So two males could come across each other. But the idea is that the females are in his home range. The home range of females, they also have their own. They're a lot smaller than males, and oftentimes the female ranges do not overlap with each other. So while females are basically rearing the kittens, males are really focused on defending their territory and searching for mates. The literature that I found is that male territories tend to be about 2 to 3 times larger than those females. All right, so their social structure. So cats are not necessarily known to be social. If you have a cat at home, you may have a few cats at home and they like to lay with each other, but that's domesticated cat. You usually don't see 5 mountain lions laying together in the sun. But that's not the truth with every single cat species. As we know, lions, African lions, are very social. So it just kind of depends, but bobcats are not going to be those social creatures. They are going to be necessarily solitary. And the only reason that we usually see them together is that they're mating or they're looking for a mate or the mate is really close. So they only usually associate each other with breeding and copulation. Otherwise, they kind of just stay by themselves. Mating system is promiscuous and polygynous. Basically, what happens is males and females mate with lots of different mates. There's no there's no laws. Breed once a year, usually in the spring. Gestation period is about 50 to 70 days. After giving birth, it takes about 8 months for those kittens to become independent with the mom. Mothers are solely involved in rearing those kittens. So once the male mates with the female, he's gone, and then she gives birth to the babies. She will rear them and get them on their own. Kittens typically hunt by themselves. Usually by the fall of the year that they are born is when they are about ready to go off on their own. So usually, like I said, it takes about 8 months for those kittens to become independent. Then they disperse soon after that. All right, what do they eat? So if any of you have cats at home, they might have varied diets. I know my mom always had a cat that liked ice cream and milk and lots of different things, but they're carnivores. So oftentimes we call them obligate carnivores, which means that strictly meat. They do not eat berries. They do not fulfill their diet with other things. A coyote is a great example of a carnivore, but not an obligate carnivore. They tend to be a little bit more omnivorous. They eat plants and different things rather than just meat. Usually, just the way that the digestive tract is set up in a cat, they cannot eat other things. So they are obligate carnivores, and they're also opportunistic predators. So basically, they will change their hunting strategy and their diet depending on those environmental circumstances and that prey availability. A majority of their diet is going to be small mammals. So it's going to be rodents and it's going to be rabbits. That doesn't mean that's all they eat. Oftentimes they will hunt larger prey such as squirrels, birds, fish, even insects. They can even sometimes jump and catch a bird in the air. That might be if they're very desperate or if they're very hungry, but it has been seen before and recorded before. Even in Nebraska, we've had this as well. Sometimes they will hunt even larger prey, like larger deer and larger ungulates. Oftentimes, if there is a young deer, a sick deer, a very skinny female, maybe a small male, we have seen in Nebraska the 2 bite marks on the vertebrae, which indicate a bobcat. And looking at the spread of them, we can tell it's not a mountain lion. We can tell it's smaller. So inevitably, that would be a bobcat. So even in Nebraska, it has been recorded that they have gone after deer and even those larger prey animals, those larger ungulates. So one of the things, we talked about this earlier, but back in the 1700s, there was a lot of bounties on these animals, because people saw them eating goats, sheep, cows, poultry. That was obviously people's way of life, and they didn't want the bobcats to eat them. So they do occasionally kill domesticated animals. This could be anything from like sheep to goats and poultry. It's not unheard of. The earliest or like the most recent study, I guess, in 2004, bobcats accounted for about 5% of all predator-caused sheep deaths. So that's not that many. It is very rare, but it does happen. So just like all those other animals. All right, so their hunting strategy, they are excellent hunters. They are quiet, they can run fast, they can travel up to 7 miles a day searching for prey in their territory. When they stalk their prey, they wait in the cover of trees and kind of wait till the prey comes closer, and they will pounce. They deliver that bite to the vertebrae of their target and kill their food instantly. To reduce the sound when they're stalking their prey, they will walk in a straight line. And so they'll put their front foot down and they will make sure their back foot lands in that same spot. So oftentimes, if you do see bobcat tracks, but you don't see 4, like I showed you earlier, you only see 2, that was a animal hunting or stalking something. So they're trying to be quiet, basically. There also is some predation of the kittens. They have been noticed to be preyed upon by foxes, coyotes, even large owls have taken baby bobcats. As far as a large adult bobcat, they really don't have any other competition, or they don't really have any other predation on them besides people. Right, so communication, we talked about this a little bit. They scent mark a lot of their things. They urinate along their travel routes. They deposit feces in what are called latrine sites. So basically it's like a big outdoor porta potty for cats. And it's also the spot where they like get all the information. It's like the water cooler for cats. So it's a gossip place. Who is in heat? who's ready to mate, who's moved into this territory. So it's like all the gossip and all the areas and all the things that you want to know from those cats. They're also scraping sites. So mountain lions will do this too. Basically, they poop on a space and then they swipe, kind of like Tinder. They swipe on an app, and basically what they're doing is letting other bobcats know that those females are ready to mate, or that I don't like you. This is my territory. I'm covering this up. So a lot of those communication scents are being used by like the glands, the urination, and the feces in those latrine sites. The marks also indicate a specific den is being used by a female and her kitten. So if there's a specific smell, if there's a specific mark, they know that that den is already occupied, so you cannot use it. There's also a signal that means that a female is receptive to mating, or she is even delineating from that home range. And then during the mating season, you might notice a lot of close range signals, facial expressions, body postures, very similar in dogs. Their tail is up, their tail's down. They are in a stalk position, they're not. And then also the vocalizations. Many of us have probably heard a bobcat scream. If you haven't, it is a sound. It is very much described as a baby crying in the woods. It's kind of an eerie sound. A lot of people, I would really highly encourage you to look it up and see what it sounds like. A lot of people have even said that loudly, it sounds like one of those alley cats, domesticated cats screaming. So it's not a pretty sound. It's kind of eerie if you're out there, but those are one of the communication ways that these animals communicate with each other. All right, so there's also something called a primordial pouch. This is basically in all cats. So you can, even if you have a cat in your house, you can go check it out after we get done with this, but it's also known as the belly flap in feline. So oftentimes when you look at a feline, you kind of notice this little extra flap of skin. It's sometimes a lot of people are like, wow, my cat's really obese. It's not a sign of obesity. It's simply this extra belly pouch of loose skin and this fatty tissue that's located along the length of the belly. It basically extends from the lower abdomens all the way to those hind legs. So it has a lot of different features. It protects their internal organs. So there's an additional layer of protection if they jump or jump from something, or if they hit something, it absorbs those impacts and it reduces those injuries. There's also greater flexibility. So it allows the skin to stretch and expand. So they have a greater range in motion when they're hunting or when they're mating, when they're moving. And then also it's just a huge energy storage area. So oftentimes in times when food is scarce, they will just continuously eat whatever they can find, more than immediately necessary. And then that extra energy is stored in that fat within that little belly flap. So very interesting. All cats will have this, even your domesticated cats. It's called the primordial pouch. And I guarantee now that you will never not see it when you look at a cat. All right. So that was pretty much like our basic morphology, distribution, habitat range of all these animals, or this bobcat. I just want to talk a little bit about their future and then what their distribution kind of looks like in Nebraska. So some of the threats they have, there have been some declines in the Midwest. They are considered an endangered species in Ohio, Illinois, and New Jersey. There's still a lot of hunting and trading. It's closely monitored, but there's also other threats that the species could face. Habitat loss, it is the #1 primary threat for a lot of animals, so bobcats are not immune to that either. And then also a lot of researchers speculate that exposure to rodenticides, especially those that contain those anticoagulants, it's increasing the susceptibility of bobcats to get basically to get mange. So mange is one of those things where the hair falls out. It doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but when it's really cold out, you don't have that insulation, you don't have that camouflage for hunting. And in the summer, if you're missing huge patches of skin or hair, you're getting sunburned. So it's a big deal. It is causing a lot of things, and they're finding now that bobcats that eat rodents that have been affected with those rodenticides are now more susceptible to getting that skin disease. All right, so where's their ecological role? So we know that everything has a role to play in the ecosystem. Where is theirs? So like other large felid species, bobcats are one of the top predators, and they have that top-down regulation effect over their ecosystem. So they are monitoring up here to make sure everything underneath them is staying in check. Bobcats also have an extensive geographic range, and they sometimes overlap with other animals. We all know that one bobcat does not have this own area by itself. there's going to be insects, there's going to be squirrels, there's rabbits, there's foxes, there's coyotes. But we found that there's very little evidence for their competitive relationships between those species. So they get along great. And then the presence of bobcats also kind of shows that there's the exclusion of those lynx from those more southern habitats. So because bobcats are really good at rodent control, they help regulate those rabbit populations, the rodent populations in their own habitats, which also then in turn helps regulate the vegetation because there's less rodents and there's less rabbits eating vegetation. So again, that top-down role. All right, and then how should people coexist? So we know that bobcats are out there. We've had some in Lincoln. If anyone's from Lincoln, you might remember it's been probably about 5 or 6 years now. There was a bobcat that showed up at the veteran hospital. It's about 70th and O Street. They went to open a shed to get some like tools out, and there's a bobcat in there. So they're even found in urban areas. We coexist with them. So there's very little evidence that bobcats will consume domesticated animals. We talked about that earlier, about 5% in 2004. They accounted for about 5% of all sheep-related predator deaths. So not that much. So they do it, but it's very rare. And they also don't hunt companion animals. Occasionally their predation has led them to that persecution and that poaching. Back when America was beginning to be itself, bobcats were known as that bounty. So they were definitely there. It is also important to recognize that bobcats are predators and they have that wild instinct to hunt. So one of the things that we also have to think about is the responsibility of people to protect their pets and also the farmers to protect their livestock. So those preventative measures can go a long way, keeping pets on leashes, monitoring pets when they're outside, don't leave them outside at night. All of those things can help us coexist with these animals. All right, and then something really quick, just what do they look like in Nebraska? They're booming, actually. They're booming bobcats. So a lot of the sightings before 1990, it was pretty rare to see one before 1990. I don't know what happened in 1990, but something changed, and there's this incredible boom of this species. So encounters have been way more common since then. Population estimates are really difficult to figure because we didn't have a great one before, but evidence shows that, quote, there are certainly more bobcats than there used to be. So that is from our fur-bearing biologist or carnivore program manager, Sam Wilson. He is the one that said that, so I trust him when he says that we have more than we used to. Also, the species harvest records that we have in Nebraska, they date back to about 1941, and there has been an incredible surge within the past few decades of them harvesting. So something, like we talked about, something changed, but bobcats are still internationally coveted and one of the most valuable Nebraska fur-bearing species. We talked about this earlier. When the market's high, one pelt can go for several $100s. And then in the late 1990s, something changed. So we have quite a few of these species. They are just all of a sudden they're booming across the Midwest, including Nebraska. The harvest went up from 50 to 200 for about 50 years. And then it's gotten all the way up to 1,500. So when we look at this, we look at those populations and we say, how many is viable for the ecosystem to lose? And at one point we said 1,500 bobcats can go and the population would still be okay, still be at a good carrying capacity, which is just how much the landscape and how much the ecosystem can hold with all those other animals. So not only did that harvest go up, but bobcats spread into other parts of Nebraska. During that population surge, we talked about them skyrocketing. So the southeastern part of the state, where very few had been reported, is a huge spot to find them now. There's been successful harvest has continued. It's also moved into the south central and southwestern regions. And then most recently reported is that Harlan, Red Willow, and Furnace counties had the highest harvest density range. So anywhere from 5.7 to about 7 bobcats per 100 square miles. So that's quite a lot when we talk about bobcats. So, all right, well, that was it. I know that was a lot of information in 45 minutes, but I think it was good information. So like we mentioned, this is part of a series. So every single week, 3 to 4 p.m. Central Standard Time, we will cover a different science topic. So next week, we're going to be talking about orb weavers. So those are spiders. I'm really excited. So we'll be talking about orb weavers. We're going to do hawks. And then just as a reminder, November 28th is that Thanksgiving Day. We will not have, almost said we will not have class. We will not have a Science of that day, but we will have them, the other ones all the way till the 19th. And just letting everyone know, if you are interested in registering for those, they each do have a separate registration. And I will send those in the email to everyone that watched today and that also registered to start with. All right. If you want more, we have lots of Science ofs on our education YouTube channel. I will send you all the link for that. We have I just checked the other day, we have 80 videos on there. So everything from fungi to fish to plants and prairie animals, the sandhills. There's lots of different topics on there that are covered. I would also really highly suggest liking our social media pages. That's where we get a lot of our information. There's also some fun things on there, and we talk about some of our events that we have too. And then also check out our Nebraska Wildlife Education website. We have free educator resources, workshops, PowerPoints, and a lot more other things that you can download for free. All right, so that's all I have right now. We'll see you guys next week for our new Science of. I will check the chat because it has been blowing up. Okay. A lot of people are saying I love like talking about not your spirit animal, but your animal that you're feeling like today. We saw tracks camping this fall near Niobrara River. Very cool. Campground owners verified this. Awesome. So now, and you hopefully have all the tools that now you can verify them when you see them again. Someone said we also have them in Thomas County at the National Forest, absolutely along the Middle Loop River. That would be a great place to find them. Someone said they don't like cats, but they like lions. So what is the harvest limit in Nebraska? That's a really good question, Mary. You can find that on our website, but I could also add that in our email that I'll send to you because I have no idea. I will check. Someone said my spirit animal is a turtle or a reptile. Someone had some issues. Great information. Thank you, Monica. Info on ear and tail coloration, proper identification. Someone asked, what are their predators? So they're kind of nice. They don't have a lot of predators. So the kittens have predators, a lot of things like coyotes, foxes, even owls will take kittens. But overall, humans are the really only predator for a bobcat. They don't really have a lot of competition or predation with other species. Do kittens go through a fuzzy phase when their spots are blurred? I don't know, Judy. It looked from that picture that they were more fuzzy. I do know that as an adult, they have the spots on top. And then as they get older in age, the spots retain on the bottom, but they do not have them on the top. So I'm not sure about that. Someone said a mountain lion might be a predator. It could be. I know mountain lions are really big into eating deer. I've seen porcupines, skunks, rabbits. I haven't heard a lot about them eating bobcats, but also I don't know. I've just never seen that before. It doesn't mean it's not true. So, all right. Well, that's all the questions, I think, but hopefully we all see you guys next week for spiders. Otherwise, I'm gonna let y'all go, and thank you for spending time with me. I will get that email sent to you tomorrow with the link for this and also the YouTube channel where you can check out all the other ones. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you later. Have a good day, good week.